My name is Olive. I'm 32 years old, and I haven't spoken to my parents in 8 months. Not since last Christmas, when everything finally came crashing down. Years of favoritism toward my younger brother Jake had left a wound that wouldn't heal. That night, after a lifetime of being second best, I finally reached my breaking point. Sometimes the most painful realizations come wrapped in holiday paper. Where are you watching from today? If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, hit that like and subscribe button. My story might help you feel less alone. I grew up in a middle-class suburb of Chicago in a house with 4 bedrooms and a backyard that seemed massive to my childhood self. From my earliest memories, there were subtle signs that my brother Jake, who is 3 years younger, held a special place in my parents' hearts that I somehow couldn't access. When Jake needed new clothes, my parents would take him shopping for a full wardrobe. Meanwhile, I often received hand-me-downs from my cousins despite being the older sibling. This never made sense to me, but when I questioned it, my mother would simply say, "You don't care about clothes as much as Jake does." But how would she know what I cared about? She never asked. The pattern continued with activities and achievements. My parents never missed a single one of Jake's baseball games. They'd arrive early to get good seats, proudly wearing team colors and cheering loudly from the bleachers. Yet somehow my art showcases were often attended by just one parent, if any, who would arrive late and leave early with a perfunctory "good job" and a glance at their watch. Our family photo albums tell the story clearly. Jake is front and center in nearly every picture, often being hugged by mom or with dad's proud hand on his shoulder. I'm usually on the periphery, sometimes half cut off from the frame or standing slightly apart. Looking through these albums as an adult was like having a revelation about a truth my child self couldn't articulate. The one person who made me feel special was my grandmother, my mother's mother. Grandma Helen lived about an hour away, and visits to her house became my sanctuary. She would display my artwork proudly on her refrigerator, ask thoughtful questions about my interests, and tell me stories about strong women in our family history. "You have a gift, Olive," she would say, examining my sketches with genuine interest. "You see the world differently than most people. That's special." When I was with Grandma Helen, I didn't feel like I was competing for attention or love. It just flowed naturally between us. She taught me to bake her special apple pie and showed me how to knit scarves that I still make to this day when I'm feeling anxious. When Grandma Helen died suddenly from a stroke when I was 14, it felt like losing my main emotional support beam. The funeral was the first time I saw my father cry, but my mother seemed more concerned with how Jake was handling it, even though Grandma and I had been much closer. After Grandma died, I doubled down on achievement, thinking that if I could just be perfect enough, my parents would finally see me. I maintained straight A's. Through high school, won several regional art competitions and participated in every extracurricular activity I could manage. Debate team captain, yearbook editor, volunteer at the local animal shelter. I filled my schedule to bursting, partly to stay busy enough not to notice the emptiness at home. When I brought home a straight A report card, my mom would say, "That's what we expect from you, Olive." But when Jake managed to pull his grades up from C's to B's, there would be celebrations, ice cream outings, and proud phone calls to relatives. For my 16th birthday, I received practical gifts, a planner, clothes for school, and art supplies. For Jake's 16th 3 years later, my parents surprised him with a used car. When I pointed out the disparity, my mother said, "You were never interested in driving, Olive. You always have your head in those sketchbooks." I had been taking the bus to school for 2 years because no one offered to teach me to drive. Throughout these years, my friend Mia was my constant support. She lived next door and had witnessed the favoritism since we were small. She was the only one I could talk to about it without feeling crazy or ungrateful. "It's not in your head, Olive," Mia would assure me. "I see it too. Your parents treat Jake differently, and it's not fair." Mia's validation kept me sane during those years. Her family often included me in their dinners and outings, showing me what it felt like to be wanted around simply for being myself. Her parents asked about my art and actually listened to the answer. They remembered things I told them and followed up later. These small acts of genuine interest felt like water in a desert. By senior year of high school, I had developed a shell of perfectionism that masked a deep well of insecurity. On the surface, I was accomplished, responsible, and mature. Teachers loved me and often used my work as examples for other students. But inside, I constantly questioned my worth. If my own parents couldn't fully love me, was there something fundamentally unlovable about me? This question would haunt me well into adulthood, shaping my relationships and choices in ways I wouldn't fully understand until much later. The seeds of unworthiness planted in childhood would grow into forests I would later have to find my way through, armed with nothing but the belief that there had to be something better on the other side. When it came time to choose a college, I deliberately selected one in New York as far from Chicago as my scholarship offers would allow. I needed space to breathe to discover who I was outside of the shadow of being Jake's sister, or the perpetual runner-up in my own home. My parents' involvement in my college transition was minimal at best. Mom helped me pack one afternoon, mainly by sitting on my bed, commenting on how I probably wouldn't need all the books I was bringing. Dad drove me to the airport, gave me an awkward side hug, and reminded me to be careful with money. In contrast, when Jake decided on a state school just 2 hours from home, my parents spent weeks helping him prepare. They took him shopping for dorm supplies, helped him connect with his roommate beforehand, and even redecorated his bedroom at home so it would be more grown-up when he returned for breaks. The financial disparity was even more glaring. I had received a partial scholarship that covered about 60% of my tuition, but was responsible for figuring out the rest through loans, work study, and whatever I had saved from summer jobs. Jake, on the other hand, had my parents' full financial support. They covered his tuition, housing, meal plan, and even gave him a monthly allowance for social activities. "Your brother isn't as organized as you are, Olive," my mother explained when I questioned this. "He needs more support to succeed. You've always been able to handle things on your own." Being capable had become my curse. The more I proved I could manage independently, the more independence was forced upon me, while Jake's struggles were met with increased support and concern. Despite these challenges, New York became my salvation. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who knew me only as myself, not in relation to Jake or my family dynamics. My roommate Layla was a dance major from Miami who saw my sketches and immediately asked if I would design posters for her upcoming showcase. "Your style is exactly what I've been looking for," she said, the first of many people who would value my artistic voice for what it was, not what it wasn't. I declared my major in graphic design and found myself thriving in classes where my perspective was valued, not merely tolerated. Professor Diana Thompson, who taught advanced typography, became a particularly important mentor. She had worked for major magazines in the 90s before transitioning to academia, and she saw potential in my work that I hadn't fully recognized myself. "You have a distinctive eye, Olive," she told me after class one day. "You're not just making things look good, you're communicating complex emotions through visual hierarchies. That can't be taught." Her encouragement gave me permission to take creative risks I might otherwise have avoided. Under her guidance, I developed a portfolio that would eventually land me my first professional job. During my sophomore year, I met Marcus in a color theory class. He was studying photography and had a quiet intensity that drew me in immediately. We started dating after collaborating on a project, and for almost 2 years, he was my first experience of what a loving partnership could be. But my insecurities eventually sabotaged the relationship. I constantly searched for signs that Marcus preferred other people's company to mine, that I wasn't creative enough for him, that he was going to leave once he discovered the unlovable core I was convinced I carried. When he wanted space to work on his thesis exhibition, I interpreted it as abandonment rather than a normal need for focus. "I can't keep reassuring you that I care about you, Olive," he said during our final conversation. "It's like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom." His words stung with their accuracy. After he left, I started seeing a campus therapist who helped me begin to recognize the patterns established in my childhood. It was my first step toward understanding that the problem wasn't some inherent flaw in me, but rather the family dynamics that had shaped my self-perception. I graduated with honors, my senior portfolio winning the department award. My parents attended the ceremony, arriving just before it began and leaving immediately after to beat traffic. They took a few photos, gave me generic congratulations, and asked when I would be moving back to Chicago. Actually, I've accepted a position at a design firm in Boston, I told them. The job was entry-level with modest pay, but it was in my field and offered growth potential. Boston. That's still so far, my mother said with a frown. We thought after this New York phase you'd want to come home. This isn't a phase, Mom. This is my career, my life. The conversation ended there, but it marked another step in the growing distance between us. I wasn't rejecting them. I was choosing myself. 2 years into my time in Boston, Jake dropped out of college after changing his major 3 times. Rather than expressing disappointment, my parents rallied around him with support and understanding. College isn't for everyone, my father said during one of our increasingly infrequent phone calls. Jake is an entrepreneur at heart. He just needs to find his path. The same father who had pressured me about practical career options and questioned the value of my arts degree was now championing Jake's decision to abandon higher education altogether with no clear plan. The double standard was so blatant, it would have been laughable if it hadn't hurt so much. Communication became increasingly strained. I called home monthly out of obligation, but the conversations were superficial. My parents rarely asked about my work or life in Boston, and when they did, they barely listened to my answers before steering the conversation back to Jake's latest ventures or neighborhood gossip about people I barely remembered. The 6 years that followed my move to Boston were transformative. What began as an entry-level position at a small design studio evolved into a senior role with significant creative input. My portfolio expanded to include branding work for local businesses that gained national attention, and I developed a distinctive style that clients specifically requested. More importantly, I built a life filled with genuine connections. My co-workers Zoe, a brilliant web developer with a dry wit, and Daniel, an account manager who baked stress-relieving cookies for the entire office during tight deadlines, became the kind of friends who show up with soup when you're sick or help you move apartments without being asked. "You're our person, Olive," Zoe declared one evening as we shared takeout after working late. "Family isn't just blood. It's who makes space for you to be yourself." This concept of chosen family was revolutionary to me. The 3 of us established weekly dinner traditions, celebrated each other's achievements with sincere enthusiasm, and created inside jokes that evolved into a language all our own. At 28, I purchased my first apartment, a small but bright 1-bedroom in a converted factory building. The day I got my keys, I stood alone in the empty space, listening to my footsteps echo against the hardwood floors, and felt a surge of pride so pure it brought tears to my eyes. This space was mine, earned through my own efforts, decorated according to my own taste, without having to justify or explain my choices to anyone. It was at a housewarming party for this apartment that I met Sam, who arrived as a friend of Daniel's boyfriend. Sam worked in environmental engineering and had a calm, steady energy that immediately put me at ease. He asked thoughtful questions about my artwork displayed on the walls and actually listened to my answers. Our relationship developed slowly and intentionally. After the impulsive intensity of my college relationships, Sam's consistency was both unfamiliar and deeply comforting. He called when he said he would. He remembered details from our conversations. He expressed his feelings clearly without dramatic gestures or games. The first time Sam joined me for a visit to my parents' home in Chicago, he noticed the dynamic immediately. In the car after dinner, he asked carefully, "Is it always like that between your brother and your parents?" "Like what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "The way they interrupted you 3 times to ask Jake about his job interview even though you were in the middle of telling them about your promotion. The way your mom kept the photo album open to Jake's graduation even after you tried to show them pictures of your new apartment." Having an outside observer validate what I had experienced my entire life was both vindicating and heartbreaking. It wasn't all in my head. The favoritism was real enough for a stranger to notice within hours. As my relationship with Sam deepened, my attempts to address the favoritism with my parents became slightly more direct. During a rare phone call when my mother actually asked about my life, I tried to explain how hurtful it was to always feel secondary. "Oh, Olive, you've always been so sensitive," she dismissed. "We love you and Jake exactly the same. You just need different things." These different things apparently included Jake's multiple failed business ventures, all funded by my parents. First was the premium dog walking service that lasted 3 months. Then came the smartphone app for finding pickup basketball games that never made it past the planning stage. After that, the specialty coffee cart that failed health inspection twice. Each failure was met with encouragement and additional financial support from my parents. Meanwhile, I was still paying off student loans for the education that had secured my stable career with no assistance from them, despite their comfortable retirement savings. The most galling moment came during a phone call when my mother actually suggested, "Maybe you could help your brother out with a loan for his new project. He's really onto something this time." I was speechless. The audacity of asking me to fund Jake's ventures when they had never contributed to my education or career was stunning. When I pointed this out, my mother acted as though I was being petty. "Family helps family, Olive. Your brother would do the same for you." But he wouldn't, and he never had. Jake had been conditioned his entire life to expect support, not provide it. This incident drove me back to therapy. I found Dr. Rachel Bennett, a psychologist specializing in family dynamics, who helped me begin to process the deep-seated feelings of inadequacy and resentment that I had been carrying. "What you're describing is a common dynamic in families," Dr. Bennett explained. "Sometimes parents unconsciously assign roles to their children. You were cast as the capable one, which meant you received less support because you were expected to succeed independently. Your brother was cast as the one who needed help, which paradoxically meant he received more resources and attention." Understanding the pattern intellectually was helpful, but the emotional wounds remained raw. With Dr. Bennett's guidance, I began practicing setting boundaries with my family. I declined invitations to events that would leave me feeling drained. I limited phone calls to times when I felt emotionally prepared. I practiced redirecting conversations when my parents launched into extended monologues about Jake's latest ventures. 2 Thanksgivings ago, the family dynamic reached a new level of absurdity. Jake arrived at dinner with an elaborate presentation about a food truck concept featuring gourmet grilled cheese sandwiches. My parents sat rapt as he showed them mock-ups of logos and menus on his tablet, oohing and aahing at his entrepreneurial spirit. "I just need some startup capital," Jake concluded, looking meaningfully at our parents. "About 50,000 should cover the truck and initial inventory." Without hesitation, my father announced they would remortgage their house to provide the funds. This, despite the fact that their retirement was not fully secured and they had already lost money on Jake's previous ventures. Sam squeezed my hand under the table as I sat in stunned silence. The grilled cheese truck, like all of Jake's previous ideas, never materialized. The money, like all previous investments, disappeared into a black hole of poor planning and impulsive decisions. That night, as Sam and I lay in bed at the hotel, I whispered, "Am I crazy for being upset about this? Should I just accept that this is how things are?" Sam brushed the hair from my face gently. "Your feelings are valid, Olive. What they're doing isn't fair, and you have every right to be hurt by it." His validation was like a balm on a wound that had been open for decades. With Sam, I began to see my family dynamic through new eyes. His family welcomed me with genuine warmth and interest. His parents, Mark and Linda, asked questions about my work and remembered the answers. They sent articles about design that made them think of me. They celebrated my accomplishments without comparison or qualification. I began to understand what family support could and should look like, and that realization made the contrast with my own family even more painful. Last Christmas marked the point of no return in my relationship with my parents. Sam and I arrived at their house in Chicago with an expensive bottle of wine he had specially selected and a homemade cranberry cheesecake I had spent hours perfecting. My mother took both offerings with a distracted, "Thanks, honey," and set them aside without comment. 20 minutes later, when Jake arrived empty-handed and 45 minutes late, my parents rushed to the door with effusive greetings and concerns about whether the traffic had been terrible. Dinner itself was pleasant enough on the surface. My mother had prepared all the traditional dishes, and conversation flowed easily around safe topics like the unseasonably warm weather and a new restaurant that had opened in their neighborhood. Sam kept giving me reassuring glances, and I felt proud of myself for maintaining composure, despite the familiar undercurrent of being somehow less important than my brother. Then, over dessert, my father cleared his throat and made an announcement. "We've been doing some estate planning," he began, looking between Jake and me. "And we've decided to give Jake the lake house property now, rather than waiting for it to pass through the will." The lake house, a small but charming 2-bedroom cabin on Lake Michigan that had been in our family for generations. The place where I had spent summers painting the changing light on the water. The property that my parents had specifically promised to me just 3 years earlier, knowing how much it meant to me. "But," I started, my voice catching. "You said that the lake house would come to me. We talked about this." My father at least had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Plans change, Olive. Jake needs it more right now. He's thinking of turning it into a rental property to generate some income while he gets his business ideas off the ground." Jake couldn't even look me in the eye as he pushed his pie around his plate. He knew as well as I did that he had never shown any particular attachment to the lake house. As children, he had always complained about having to go there instead of staying in the city with his friends. He had never once visited it as an adult without being dragged along for family gatherings. I felt Sam's hand on my knee under the table, a gentle pressure grounding me as the room seemed to tilt. "Besides," my mother added, as if helping, "you've always been the independent one, Olive. You don't need our help like Jake does." Something inside me snapped. It was as if a dam that had been holding back 32 years of hurt suddenly gave way. In that moment, all the carefully constructed justifications I had created to explain away their behavior crumbled. This wasn't about Jake needing more help. This was about Jake being valued more. "Independent." I repeated, my voice unnaturally calm. "I wasn't independent by choice, Mom. I became independent because I had to. Because from the time we were children, Jake got new clothes while I got hand-me-downs. Jake got driving lessons and a car while I took the bus. Jake got full college tuition while I'm still paying off student loans." My parents exchanged alarmed glances, clearly unprepared for this departure from our usual script of polite avoidance. Every achievement of mine was met with, "That's nice, Olive," while Jake was celebrated for the bare minimum. Every time I needed support, I was told how capable I was of handling things on my own, while Jake received endless second chances and financial bailouts. The words poured out of me, years of observations and hurts that I had carefully documented but never voiced. I listed specific instances, dates, comments they had made. The time my art had been featured in a gallery and they had skipped the opening for Jake's intramural soccer game. The graduation they had nearly missed because they were helping Jake move into a new apartment. The countless times my calls had gone to voicemail while Jake could reach them any time. And now the one thing that you promised to me that you knew had special meaning to me, you're giving to Jake because he needs it more. When will it be my turn to matter as much? The table fell silent. My mother's face had gone pale, and my father was staring down at his hands. Jake finally spoke up, his tone defensive. "It's not my fault they treat me differently, Olive. You're just jealous because my dreams are bigger than your little design job." Sam, who had been silently supportive until now, straightened in his chair. "That's completely unfair, Jake. Olive has built an impressive career through hard work and talent. She's never asked your parents for anything despite the clear disparity in how you've both been supported." I felt a surge of gratitude for Sam's defense, but my mother quickly jumped in to smooth things over in her typical fashion. "Let's all just calm down. Olive, you're being dramatic. We've always supported both of you in the ways you needed. You're just more self-sufficient." My father nodded. "You've always been difficult even as a child. Always so sensitive about everything." Those words hit me like a physical blow. In their eyes, my pain wasn't valid. My observations weren't reality. I was just difficult, just sensitive. The problem wasn't their behavior. It was my perception of it. I stood up, my legs unsteady. "Sam, I think we should go." "Olive, don't be ridiculous," my mother said. "It's Christmas. Sit down and let's enjoy our dessert. We can talk about the lake house some other time." But there was nothing left to talk about. Years of therapy had taught me that when people show you who they are, you should believe them. My parents had shown me consistently and repeatedly that Jake's needs would always come before mine, that my feelings would always be dismissed as oversensitivity, that in the family equation I would always be the lesser variable. "I'm not being ridiculous," I said quietly. "I'm finally being honest, and I can't do this anymore." Sam stood beside me, his presence steady and reassuring. We gathered our coats despite my parents' protests and Jake's eye-rolling. As we reached the door, my mother caught my arm. "You're overreacting. You'll calm down and realize this isn't worth throwing a tantrum over." I looked into her eyes, searching for any recognition of the pain she had caused, any willingness to truly hear me. I found neither. "This isn't a tantrum, Mom. This is a boundary. I deserve better than to be an afterthought in my own family." The drive back to our hotel was silent except for my occasional muffled sobs. Sam kept one hand on mine across the console, a lifeline of understanding in what felt like an ocean of rejection. The breakdown came later that night in our hotel room. After holding myself together through the confrontation and the drive, I finally collapsed on the bed and let the full weight of what had happened crash over me. "They're never going to see me, Sam," I sobbed as he held me. "They're never going to love me the way they love him." Sam stroked my hair and let me cry until my body was exhausted from it. "Their inability to see your worth doesn't diminish it, Olive," he said softly. "It diminishes them." That night, I made the decision to take a break from communication with my family. It wasn't a dramatic declaration or ultimatum. I simply needed space to process 32 years of accumulated pain without their voices in my head telling me I was overreacting. The next morning, my phone lit up with texts from my mother, all variations on the same theme. I was being dramatic. I had ruined Christmas. I needed to apologize to Jake for embarrassing him. We should put this behind us and move forward as if nothing had happened. There was no acknowledgement of my pain, no reflection on the examples I had given, no consideration that perhaps, just perhaps, there was some truth to what I had said. Jake sent a single message. "Way to make everything about you again. Mom's really upset. Hope you're happy." I turned my phone off for the remainder of our stay in Chicago. Sam and I spent the next 2 days visiting the Art Institute and eating at our favorite restaurants before flying back to Boston. It was a strange limbo of a vacation caught between the familiarity of my hometown and the acute awareness that I had just fundamentally altered my relationship with my family. Back in Boston, I intensified my therapy sessions with Dr. Bennett, trying to process the confrontation and its aftermath. "What you did took enormous courage," she told me. "Setting boundaries with family is one of the hardest things we ever do, especially when there's a lifetime of established patterns at play." The first weeks of silence were physically difficult. I experienced insomnia, waking at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, replaying the confrontation, and thinking of all the things I should have said differently. I lost my appetite and found it hard to concentrate at work. I threw myself into projects, staying late at the office and taking on freelance assignments that kept my mind and hands busy. Zoe and Daniel noticed the change in me and stepped up their support without being asked. "Thursday dinner's at my place until further notice," Daniel declared. "No arguments. I'm making comfort food and we're watching bad reality TV." These weekly gatherings became an anchor in a time when I felt adrift. We would eat Daniel's spectacular pasta dishes or Zoe's experimental vegetarian cuisine, laugh at ridiculous dating shows, and talk about everything and nothing. They never pressed me to discuss my family unless I brought it up first, but they listened without judgment when I needed to vent. About 3 weeks after Christmas, my parents tried a different approach. Instead of telling me I was overreacting, they attempted to act as if nothing had happened at all. My mother called with chatty updates about neighbors and distant relatives. My father sent an email about a tax document I might need. Neither mentioned the confrontation or the lake house or any of the substantive issues I had raised. It was gaslighting in its purest form. The message was clear: your feelings are so insignificant that we don't even need to acknowledge them. We can simply pretend they don't exist, and eventually you'll fall back in line. I maintained minimal civil contact during this phase, responding to direct questions with brief answers, but not engaging in their attempts at normal conversation. It felt both cruel and necessary, like putting pressure on a wound to stop the bleeding. 2 months into this strained dynamic, my mother escalated her tactics, sending a message that my father had been experiencing chest pains and was undergoing tests. The implication was clear: your stubbornness is literally breaking your father's heart. I called my father, immediately concerned despite everything. He answered, sounding perfectly fine, and seemed confused when I asked about his health. "Oh, that. It was just indigestion. Your mother worries too much." The deliberate manipulation infuriated me. Using health scares to force reconciliation without addressing the underlying issues was a new low. In our next therapy session, Dr. Bennett helped me craft a clear message to my parents. "I love you both, but I need you to understand that our relationship cannot return to what it was. I'm taking space to heal from patterns that have been hurtful to me. I'm not doing this to punish you, but to take care of myself. When you're ready to have an honest conversation about the concerns I've raised, I'm willing to engage in that with appropriate boundaries." My mother's response was a single line: "I don't know why you need to make everything so complicated." It was during this period that I discovered an online community of adults who had experienced similar family dynamics. Reading their stories was like finding pages from my own diary. The same patterns, the same dismissals, the same struggle to trust their own reality in the face of family gaslighting. One woman's post particularly resonated with me. The hardest part wasn't establishing the boundary. It was accepting that they might never acknowledge why the boundary was necessary in the first place. Sam remained my rock throughout this tumultuous time. He never tried to push me toward reconciliation for the sake of peace, never suggested I was overreacting. Instead, he validated my experience and supported whatever decisions I made about contact with my family. When we began discussing marriage more seriously, he broached the subject carefully. "I want you to have the wedding you want, Olive. If that means your family isn't there, I'm completely okay with that." The fact that he put my emotional well-being ahead of convention or expectations was yet another confirmation that I had found someone who truly saw and valued me. The contrast with my family of origin couldn't have been starker. "Maybe a small ceremony," I suggested. "Just people who genuinely support us and want to be there." Sam smiled and squeezed my hand. "That sounds perfect." As 3 months of distance turned into 5, then 8, I found myself in a strange new territory of grief and liberation. The grief came in waves, usually triggered by small things: seeing a mother and daughter shopping together, hearing someone talk about family holiday traditions, receiving wedding planning emails about father-daughter dances. But alongside the grief was a growing sense of freedom. Without the constant background radiation of trying to earn my parents' approval, I found myself making choices based solely on what I truly wanted. I took creative risks at work that led to my best designs yet. I said no to obligations that didn't serve me. I expressed my needs in my relationship with Sam with a directness that would have been impossible before. Dr. Rachel was instrumental in helping me understand that the validation I had sought from my parents for decades might never come. "Sometimes," she explained gently, "the most loving thing we can do for ourselves is to stop seeking approval from people who are incapable of giving it in a healthy way." Instead, she encouraged me to practice self-validation and to parent my inner child in the ways my actual parents had not. This concept felt strange at first, but gradually became a powerful tool for healing. When I accomplished something at work, instead of immediately calling my parents, hoping for approval they would never adequately give, I took myself out for a nice lunch and sat with the genuine pride I felt in my achievement. When I felt the old insecurities creeping in, I would speak to myself with the kindness and reassurance I would offer a friend or a child. Art, which had always been my refuge, took on new dimensions in my healing journey. I began keeping a visual journal, creating abstract pieces that expressed emotions I sometimes couldn't put into words. What started as private therapy evolved into a series that my gallery friend Amara encouraged me to display. "These pieces are raw and universal, Olive," she said, flipping through my journal. They speak to anyone who's ever felt invisible or misunderstood. The resulting exhibition, titled Unseen, became my most personal and surprisingly most commercially successful work to date. Creating something beautiful from pain felt like the ultimate reclamation of my experience. My relationship with Sam's family deepened during this period. His parents, Mark and Linda, never tried to replace my parents or minimize the complexity of my feelings about my family of origin. Instead, they simply included me naturally in their lives, demonstrating through consistent actions what family support could look like. Linda and I developed a particularly close bond over our shared love of gardening. She taught me how to propagate her prized hydrangeas and listened with genuine interest to my ideas for landscaping our future home. When Sam and I found a house we loved with a neglected garden, Linda spent an entire weekend helping me identify plants worth saving and planning new beds. "You have a good eye for design in gardens, just like your other work," she told me as we sat on the porch with dirt under our fingernails drinking lemonade. The casual compliment, delivered without agenda or comparison, filled a space in my heart I hadn't realized was still empty. At work, my increased confidence led to a promotion to creative director of our studio's rebranded digital division. The role came with more responsibility, but also more creative freedom and the ability to mentor junior designers. I found unexpected fulfillment in this mentorship, particularly with Jasmine, a talented but insecure recent graduate who reminded me of my younger self. "I never feel good enough," she confessed during a portfolio review. "Everyone else seems so confident in their work, but I'm always second-guessing myself." I recognized the familiar patterns of someone who had been taught to doubt her own perceptions and abilities. "What if," I suggested, "the problem isn't your work, but the lens you're viewing it through? What if you're actually exactly as talented as everyone keeps telling you you are?" Seeing her growth as she began to internalize her own worth became one of the most rewarding aspects of my career. By helping her recognize and overcome the limitations of negative self-perception, I was also healing parts of myself. Around this time, I joined a support group for adult children of emotionally unavailable parents. Meeting weekly in a community center conference room, we shared stories, strategies, and setbacks in our journeys toward healthier relationships with ourselves and others. It was there that I met Amanda, whose experiences with her mother were so similar to mine that we sometimes finished each other's sentences. She had been estranged from her parents for 3 years, a fact that both terrified and reassured me. Terrified because it confirmed that reconciliation wasn't always possible. Reassured because she had survived and even thrived in that reality. "The hardest thing," Amanda told me over coffee after one session, "is grieving the relationship you deserved but never had. Once you work through that grief, though, there's this incredible space that opens up for building the life and relationships you actually want." As Sam and I began planning our wedding in earnest, the question of my family's involvement became unavoidable. The traditional father walking the bride down the aisle, mother helping with dress shopping, parents hosting rehearsal dinners, all felt like landmines in my emotional landscape. "What feels right to you?" Sam asked one evening as we sat with wedding planning websites open on our laptops. After careful consideration, I decided on a small ceremony at a botanical garden with only our closest friends and Sam's family. Linda offered to help me shop for a dress, approaching the task with excitement, but also sensitivity to my complicated feelings. "Whatever you choose will be perfect," she assured me, a simple statement that carried profound meaning after a lifetime of conditional approval. Mark surprised me by asking if I would like him to walk me down the aisle, quick to add, "Only if that feels comfortable for you, Olive. No pressure either way." His offer brought tears to my eyes. "I'd like that very much," I told him, touched by his willingness to step into a role that acknowledged the complexity of my situation without judgment. As wedding plans progressed, I had a revelation during a therapy session with Dr. Rachel. "I've created a life I love despite not because of my upbringing," I said. "For so long, I defined myself by what I lacked from my parents. But now I'm building something different, something better." Dr. Rachel smiled. "That's the most powerful form of healing, Olive. Not just recovering from wounds, but creating something beautiful in their place." A particularly significant breakthrough came during a session where Dr. Rachel guided me through an exercise expressing the anger I had spent a lifetime suppressing. With her encouragement, I spoke aloud all the things I had wanted to say to my parents, but never could. I raged, I cried, I named the injustices big and small that had shaped my life. When the storm of emotion passed, I felt a profound sense of emptiness, followed by a quieter, deeper grief. I just wanted them to love me the way I needed to be loved, I whispered. Is that so much to ask? No, Dr. Rachel said simply. It's the most basic thing a child should be able to expect, and the fact that you didn't receive it is a failure on their part, not yours. That session marked a turning point. Having fully expressed my anger and grief, I found myself able to look forward more clearly, without the weight of unexpressed emotion clouding my vision. With Sam, Zoe, Daniel, and my new circle of supportive friends, I began creating new traditions to replace the family gatherings that had always left me feeling diminished. Friendsgiving dinners where everyone's contributions were celebrated equally. Birthday celebrations where I was genuinely the center of attention for a day without apology. Holiday gift exchanges where the thought behind each present mattered more than its cost. Drawing from my own experience of feeling unseen, I also started volunteering with a community arts program for teenagers, particularly those from challenging family backgrounds. Teaching these young people that their creative voice mattered, that their perspective was unique and valuable, became a form of healing I hadn't anticipated. You're the first adult who's ever told me my art is good, said Trey, a 15-year-old whose abstract paintings showed remarkable emotional depth. My dad says art is a waste of time. Your dad is wrong, I told him with certainty that came from my own journey. Your art matters because you matter. 7 months into my estrangement from my parents, Jake reached out with what could generously be called a half apology. Look, I never meant for things to get this bad, his message read. I know you're upset about the lake house and stuff. It's just weird not having you at family things. Can't we just move past this? It makes everyone uncomfortable. His words revealed that he still didn't understand the depth of the issues at hand. His concern was primarily for his own discomfort and that of our parents, not for the decades of hurt that had led to this point. I replied with kindness but firmness, explaining that moving past this would require acknowledgement and change, not just the passage of time. He didn't respond, and I felt a sad resignation, but also a strengthening of my resolve. I would no longer accept crumbs of affection or respect from anyone, even family. 8 months after the Christmas confrontation, I received a letter in the mail from my father. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter on the stationery he reserved for important correspondence. With shaking hands, I opened it, Sam sitting beside me for support. Dear Olive, it began. I have been doing a lot of thinking since Christmas. Your mother and I attended some counseling sessions at the suggestion of our pastor, and I have come to recognize some difficult truths about our family dynamics. The letter continued acknowledging specific instances I had mentioned during our confrontation. He admitted that they had consistently placed Jake's needs above mine, justified it as giving more to the child who struggled, but could now see how this had been deeply unfair. While I cannot change the past, he wrote, I want you to know that I hear what you have been trying to tell us for years. You deserved better, and I am truly sorry for the pain our actions have caused. The letter concluded with an open invitation to talk when I felt ready with no pressure or timeline attached. I read it 3 times, emotions swirling. It wasn't a complete reckoning with all that had happened, and notably, it came only from my father, not my mother. But it was the first genuine acknowledgement I had ever received that my perceptions were valid, that the favoritism had been real and harmful. What do you think? Sam asked gently after giving me time to process. I think it's a start, I said carefully. Not a solution, but a start. After discussing it with Dr. Rachel, I decided to respond to my father with a letter of my own. I thanked him for his acknowledgement and expressed willingness for gradual steps toward a healthier relationship, but with clear boundaries. I explained that any reconciliation would need to include respect for my experience, no pressure to get over it quickly, and tangible changes in behavior, not just words. I love you, I concluded, but I love myself too much now to accept the dynamics that hurt me for so long. As our wedding plans reached their final stages, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness that my relationship with my parents remained tenuous, relief that I no longer felt compelled to accept mistreatment for the sake of family harmony, hope that my father's letter might represent the beginning of real change, and overwhelming gratitude for the family I was creating through choice rather than birth. Sam's mother, Linda, had become the kind of maternal figure I had always craved. She offered guidance when asked, but respected my decisions without judgment. She expressed pride in my accomplishments without qualification. She made me feel valued simply for being myself, not for what I achieved or provided. "I want you to know," she told me during a quiet moment while we addressed wedding invitations, "that Mark and I couldn't be happier that you're becoming officially part of our family. But you've been family to us since the first time Sam brought you home." This unconditional inclusion was a healing balm after a lifetime of conditional acceptance. My professional life flourished as the creative constraints of perfectionism fell away. Without the pressure to prove my worth through achievement, I found myself taking risks that led to my most innovative work. A branding campaign I designed for a women's health initiative won industry recognition and led to speaking opportunities at design conferences. I began saying yes to these public speaking engagements, something I would have avoided in the past out of fear of judgment. Standing on stages sharing my creative process, I sometimes caught myself having the surreal thought, if only my younger self could see me now speaking with confidence valued for my unique perspective. The most profound shift, however, was internal. The constant background noise of unworthiness that had accompanied me throughout my life began to quiet. The voice that had always whispered, "not enough," was gradually replaced by one that said, "exactly as you should be." I came to understand that breaking the silence about the favoritism had broken its power over me. By naming the dynamic that had shaped my life, I had taken the first step toward freedom from it. By setting boundaries against continued mistreatment, I had declared my own worth when no one else would. The truth was both painful and liberating. My parents might never fully acknowledge the depth of the favoritism or its impact on me. My mother especially seemed unable or unwilling to see her role in my pain. But my healing couldn't depend on their recognition. It had to come from within, supported by those who could see and value me as I deserved. "Your worth was never determined by their inability to see it," Dr. Rachel reminded me in one of our sessions. "It has always been intrinsic to who you are." This realization led me to start working on a graphic novel based on my experiences, a project that combined my professional skills with my personal journey. The story centered on a young woman learning to trust her own perceptions in a family that constantly rewrote reality. Through subtle visual metaphors and careful storytelling, I hope to reach others struggling with similar dynamics to help them feel less alone. "Art has always been my way of processing the world," I explained to Sam as I showed him the initial character sketches. "Now it can maybe help someone else process theirs." His support for this deeply personal project was unwavering. "Your story deserves to be told, Olive, and you're exactly the right person to tell it." As the 8-month mark of my estrangement passed, I found myself in a place of surprising peace. There was still sadness for what might have been for the parents I had deserved, but never had. There was still occasional anger when memories surfaced unexpectedly. But these emotions no longer defined me or controlled my reactions. Instead, I had found a bittersweet acceptance. Creating distance from my family of origin had been the most loving choice I could make for myself. Not out of spite or punishment, but out of self-preservation and growth. Sometimes love looks like walking away from people who cannot love you in the way you need, even when those people are your parents. The journey continues with steps forward and occasional steps back. Healing isn't linear, as Dr. Rachel often reminds me, but I am no longer lost in the woods of self-doubt and unworthiness. I have found my way to a clearing where I can see myself clearly, perhaps for the first time. If you're watching this and feeling invisible in your own family, know that you're not alone. Your perceptions are valid. Your needs matter. Your voice deserves to be heard. Sometimes the most courageous act of self-love is setting boundaries with the people who should have loved you best. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family? What helped you through that process? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve more than being an afterthought in their own story. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Remember, family is ultimately about love and respect, not just shared DNA.